I'm Haley, 29 female. I live in a cozy, one-bedroom apartment in the city that my uncle loves to call cramped. By day, I design user experiences for a major tech company, a job that is both demanding and, thankfully, very rewarding. My life is quiet, curated, and entirely my own, a fact that seems to be a constant source of irritation for certain members of my family. This is the story of how a single, celebratory purchase I made for myself, a watch, ended up exposing the ugly, transactional nature of the relatives I had always tried to love, and how I finally learned to stop seeking their approval. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. The silence in my apartment was my most prized possession. It wasn't an empty silence, but a full one, populated by the hum of my standing desk, the gentle rustle of leaves from the ficus tree in the corner, and the distant, muted symphony of the city 6 floors below. For 5 years, this 700-square-foot space had been my sanctuary. It was where I'd taught myself to code, where I'd built the portfolio that landed me my first junior designer role, and where I'd logged the thousands of hours that got me promoted to senior UX/UI designer. Every square inch of it was mine, paid for with my own hard work, a concept my mother's side of the family seemed to struggle with. My mother, Susan, understood. A retired librarian, she valued the peace that came with a well-ordered life and a good book. Her brother, my Uncle Mark, did not. Mark was a real estate agent and not a quiet one. His entire personality was built on the foundation of square footage, granite countertops, and commission checks. He saw my apartment not as a home, but as a failure to launch. Still in that little shoebox, Haley. He'd boom over the phone on the rare occasions I didn't see his call coming. "You're nearly 30. When are you going to buy a real place? You know, I could get you a great deal on a starter home. A real investment." To him, my life was a series of bad investments. I rented instead of buying. I worked a computer job that he didn't understand for a company with a name that sounded made up. I didn't have a husband or even a serious boyfriend. His son, my cousin Josh, was the golden child. Josh was 30, a year older than me, and had followed his father into the real estate business. He had a fiancée, a 2-car garage, and a mortgage the size of a small country's GDP. He was, in Mark's eyes, a success. So when the embossed, cream-colored invitation arrived, my heart sank. "You are cordially invited to celebrate the engagement of Jessica Hart and Joshua Sterling." It was to be held at the Willows, a stuffy, overpriced restaurant that Mark used for all his big closings. My attendance was not optional. My mother had already called twice, her voice laced with the gentle anxiety she always got before a family gathering. "Please just come, honey. It'll only be a few hours. Just be nice." Being nice was the family tax I paid for existing. It meant smiling placidly while Mark compared my salary, which he wildly underestimated, to Josh's commission on a single house sale. It meant nodding along as my aunt talked about the biological clock, and it meant ignoring the pitying looks when I said, no, I wasn't dating anyone seriously. This time, however, something was different. Tucked away in a velvet box in my nightstand was a secret I'd been keeping for a month. It was a watch, but it wasn't just any watch. It was a Patek Philippe Calatrava, reference 6119R rose gold, with a classic, minimalist white face and a brown alligator strap. It was elegant, understated, and absurdly expensive. It was also the culmination of a promise I'd made to myself when I got my last promotion and a significant stock bonus. For years, I had put every spare penny into savings and investments, living frugally, telling myself that one day I would have enough security to finally breathe. The watch wasn't an impulse buy, it was a trophy. A quiet, personal monument to my own success, something just for me. I had never worn it outside my apartment. I'd put it on sometimes in the evenings, feeling the cool, heavy weight of the gold on my wrist, a tangible reminder that the silent hours I'd poured into my work had amounted to something real. It was my secret armor. The party was on a Saturday. For a week I debated. Could I endure it? The usual condescension, the belittling questions, the sheer exhaustion of performing as the family's resident underachiever. I thought about calling in sick, faking a work emergency. But then I thought of my mother, who would have to bear the brunt of Mark's disappointment alone. And then a different thought crept in. A small, rebellious spark. What if I wore the watch? It wasn't for them, it was. And to show off. It was for me. A reminder strapped to my wrist that their opinion of my life didn't define it. Their metrics of success, big houses, flashy cars, a husband, were not mine. My success was quiet, cerebral, and sitting in a velvet box. Wearing it would be like bringing my sanctuary with me. It would be my silent rebuttal to every condescending comment. The decision was made. I would go to the engagement party, and I would wear my armor. I spent more time choosing my outfit than I usually would. I needed something that said put together, but not trying too hard. I settled on a simple, dark navy silk dress that fell just below the knee, with long sleeves. It was elegant but modest, the perfect canvas. The watch would be the only piece of jewelry I wore. As I got ready, my phone buzzed. It was my mom. "Are you on your way, sweetie? I saved you a seat next to me." "Leaving now, Mom. See you in 20. I clasped the watch around my wrist. The rose gold glowed warmly against my skin. It felt solid, reassuring. I took a deep breath, looking at my reflection in the mirror. It was just Haley in a navy dress heading to a family dinner. But tonight, I wasn't going in defenseless. Tonight, I was bringing a quiet, ticking testament to a life they couldn't see and would never understand. Or so I thought. The Willows was exactly as I remembered. A sea of beige, punctuated by overly ornate floral arrangements and the low, cloying scent of potpourri. The private room Mark had booked was in the back, a long, narrow space dominated by a heavy mahogany table set for 12. I was, of course, one of the last to arrive. All heads turned as I entered, a wave of lukewarm smiles washing over me. "Haley, there she is." Uncle Mark's voice cut through the murmur of conversation. He was standing at the head of the table, a glass of red wine in his hand, his face already flushed. "We were about to send out a search party. Find a parking spot for that little car of yours, all right." I forced a smile. "It was fine, Uncle Mark. Hi, everyone." My mom gave me a grateful look from her seat and patted the empty chair beside her. I slid into it, my purse in my lap, my left hand instinctively tucked under the table. Josh and his fiancée, Jessica, were seated directly across from me. Josh, looking like a softer, less confident version of his father, gave me a lazy wave. Jessica, however, watched me with the sharp, appraising eyes of a hawk. Her profession was a personal stylist, which meant she judged people's outfits for a living. Her own was a masterclass in logos. A Gucci belt, a Louis Vuitton purse on the chair beside her, and shoes with telltale red soles. "Haley, you look nice," Jessica said, her gaze sweeping over my simple navy dress. The subtext was clear: you look boring. "Thanks, Jessica, you too. Congratulations to you both," I said, nodding at Josh. "Yeah, thanks," Josh mumbled, already more interested in the bread basket. The dinner began, and with it, the familiar ritual of the Sterling family interrogation, led by Chief Prosecutor Mark. He started by regaling the table with a story about a massive commercial property he just sold, peppering the story with numbers that grew larger with each retelling. "And the commission on that alone, well, let's just say Josh and Jess won't have to worry about the down payment on their new house," he finished, beaming at the happy couple. Jessica preened, "We're looking in the North Hills area. We need at least 4 bedrooms for when we have kids and a big yard for the dog we're going to get. A golden retriever." "A great family dog," Mark boomed approvingly. "You see, Haley, that's planning for the future. You should take notes." I took a slow sip of my water, the condensation cold against my fingers. "My 1 bedroom is plenty for me and my ficus tree," I said, keeping my tone light. Mark chuckled, a loud, wheezing sound. "Still living in that cramped apartment? Oh, honey, you're a smart girl, you do that computer thing. But you're throwing money away on rent. It's a black hole. You're building someone else's equity." "I'm happy where I am," I said, a little more firmly this time. My left hand was still under the table, my thumb tracing the smooth edge of the watch case. I could feel its weight, a small, secret anchor in a sea of judgment. The conversation moved on, but the theme remained the same. The grandeur of Josh and Jessica's future versus the perceived smallness of my present. They talked about their wedding plans, a destination wedding in Tuscany, their honeymoon, a month in the Maldives, and the new Audi Josh was getting as a wedding gift from his dad. Through it all, I remained quiet, offering polite murmurs of congratulations. I ate my salmon, I complimented the mediocre wine, and I counted the minutes until I could make a graceful exit. I felt a familiar tension headache starting to bloom behind my eyes. I shifted in my seat, resting my arms on the table for a moment to stretch my back. And that's when it happened. As I reached for my water glass, my sleeve slid back a few inches, revealing the watch. It was just for a second, but it was enough. Jessica's eyes, trained to spot luxury from a mile away, darted down to my wrist. Her perfectly manicured hand froze halfway to her mouth, a forkful of risotto hovering in the air. Her expression shifted. The bored, dismissive look was gone, replaced by a flicker of confusion, then intense curiosity. She didn't say anything at first, just continued to stare at my wrist. I subtly pulled my sleeve back down, my heart starting to beat a little faster. It was a stupid, paranoid thought, but I felt suddenly exposed. She leaned over and whispered something to Josh. He glanced at my wrist, shrugged, and went back to his food. But Jessica wasn't letting it go. She discreetly pulled her phone out of her purse, placing it in her lap below the table's edge. I tried to ignore it. I turned to my mom and asked her about the new book club she joined. We spoke for a few minutes, the conversation a welcome island of normalcy. But I could feel Jessica's intense focus from across the table. I could hear the faint, frantic tapping of her acrylic nails on her phone screen. Uncle Mark was now lecturing his brother-in-law about the stock market. It's a casino, I tell you, a total gamble. Real estate, that's tangible. You can see it, you can touch it. And then, a sharp gasp from across the table. It was Jessica. Her head was bent over her phone, her face illuminated by its glow. Her perfectly applied lipstick was now framing a mouth that was hanging wide open. "Oh my God," she whispered, just loud enough for the entire table to hear. The conversation died instantly, every eye turned to her. Josh looked annoyed. "What is it, Jess?" She didn't look at him. She looked at me, her eyes wide with a mixture of shock and disbelief. "Your watch," she said, her voice a strange, strangled squeak. I felt a cold dread wash over me. "I'm sorry." "Your watch," she repeated, louder this time. She held up her phone. On the screen was the official Patek Philippe website. Open to the page for the Calatrava 6119R, the price was displayed in stark, bold numbers right below the glamour shot. "This is your watch, isn't it?" she demanded, her voice accusing, as if she'd caught me shoplifting. Uncle Mark squinted, leaning forward. "What watch? What's going on?" Slowly, feeling like I was in a surreal dream, I lifted my left hand and placed it on the table. The rose gold of the Calatrava seemed to absorb all the light in the room, glowing with an intensity that felt obscene. The entire table went quiet, not the polite, conversational quiet from before, but a dead, heavy silence. The only sound was the distant clatter of dishes from the main dining room. Mark stared at the watch, his brow furrowed. He clearly didn't recognize the brand, but he recognized the look of something expensive. Josh just looked confused. My mother looked worried. It was Jessica who broke the silence, her voice dripping with a bizarre combination of awe and accusation. "That's a Patek Philippe. It costs more than my car." She wasn't wrong. It cost more than her used Mercedes C-Class, and probably the down payment on their 4-bedroom house, too. Suddenly, my cramped apartment and little car seemed to hang in the air, juxtaposed against the impossible reality of the object on my wrist. Uncle Mark's smug, laughing face from moments before had vanished. His mouth was slightly agape, the ruddy color draining from his cheeks. He looked from the watch on my wrist to my face, then back to the watch. The gears were turning in his head, the numbers not adding up, his entire perception of me shattering in real time. Still living in that cramped apartment? He had laughed. Now, his laughter was a ghost, haunting the suffocating silence of the room. The interrogation was over. A new, far more complicated chapter had just begun. The ride home from the restaurant was a blur. I drove on autopilot, the silence in my car a stark contrast to the ringing in my ears. The weight of the watch on my wrist felt different now, not reassuring, but heavy, like a manacle. My simple act of personal defiance had backfired spectacularly. I hadn't wanted to prove a point, I had only wanted to feel strong in my own skin. Instead, I had detonated a bomb, and the fallout was already beginning. My mother called before I had even taken my shoes off. "Haley, honey, are you okay?" Her voice was fraught with worry. "I'm fine, Mom, just a weird night." "Your uncle is confused," she said, a massive understatement. "He kept asking me after you left, where would she get the money for something like that? Is she into something illegal?" I told him of course not, that you have a very good job, but he doesn't listen. "He never does," I sighed, sinking onto my sofa. "He also said," she hesitated, "that maybe you've had a secret benefactor, an older man." I felt a hot flash of anger. "Are you kidding me? He thinks I have a sugar daddy, because the idea of me earning my own money is just too impossible for him to comprehend." "I know, honey, it's awful. I told him he was being ridiculous, just be prepared. I think this stirred something up." She was right. The first text message arrived the next morning. It was from my cousin, Josh. "Hey, Haley. Crazy night lol. Dad was really impressed by your watch. Listen, Jess and I were thinking. The wedding in Tuscany is getting super expensive. We were wondering if you'd be able to help us out with a small loan to make it really special. We can pay you back after we sell the Miller house." I stared at the message, my coffee growing cold in my hand. A small loan. For years, I was the pitiable cousin, the one barely scraping by in her shoebox. 24 hours after they discovered I wasn't poor, I had been upgraded to a personal bank. I felt a wave of nausea. The sheer audacity of it was breathtaking. I didn't reply. 2 days later, the real offensive began. Uncle Mark called me directly. He didn't even bother with a hello. "Haley, I've been doing some thinking," he began, his voice oozing a syrupy, insincere warmth I had never heard from him before. "Your mother tells me your computer job pays well. Very well, apparently. That's fantastic. I'm proud of you. Really." "Thanks, Uncle Mark," I said, my voice flat. "Listen, I've got a business proposition for you, a real opportunity. You know I've been wanting to expand the agency, maybe open a second office in the Lake District. Prime real estate up there. But banks, you know how they are, all red tape and bureaucracy." I knew exactly where this was going. "I need a short-term investor," he continued, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Someone with vision, someone in the family. We're talking a silent partnership. You put in the capital, I do all the work, and we split the profits 70-30. Your favor, of course. It's a can't-miss opportunity to get your money out of those risky stocks and into something tangible. Bricks and mortar." The man who, less than a week ago, was mocking my financial literacy was now pitching me a can't-miss investment deal that was laughably terrible. A 70-30 split. He was asking me to fund his entire expansion for a minority share of the potential profit. The discovery wasn't just that they knew I had money. It was the immediate, shameless, and entitled way they felt they had a right to it. My success wasn't something for them to celebrate. It was a resource for them to exploit. "I'll have to think about it," I said, the words tasting like ash. "I'll need to see a full business plan, projected financials, market analysis." He faltered. "Well, of course, I'm drawing it all up now. It's mostly in my head at the moment, but the vision is crystal clear. This is a family thing, Haley. We don't need all that corporate nonsense." The calls and texts became an avalanche. Jessica texted me links to designer honeymoon packages with smiling emojis. Josh sent me Zillow listings for houses he thought I should buy, through him, of course, for the commission. A second cousin I hadn't spoken to in 5 years suddenly remembered my birthday was coming up and wanted to know what my plans were. The insincerity was suffocating. My quiet life had been invaded. My sanctuary felt breached. Every buzz of my phone made me jump, my stomach twisting into a knot. They weren't just asking for money, they were trying to rewrite our entire history, to erase decades of their condescension with a few weeks of cloying, transparent flattery. They didn't see me, Haley. They saw a walking, talking ATM with a Patek Philippe watch. The betrayal wasn't the laughter at the dinner party. That was just Mark being Mark. The real betrayal was this, the discovery that their respect, their affection, their very perception of my worth as a human being was directly and exclusively tied to my net worth. The moment they thought I had money, I became valuable. The moment I was just their niece in a small apartment, I was an object of pity. I spent a week in a state of anxious paralysis, ignoring their messages, screening their calls. I felt trapped. If I said no, I would be the villain. The selfish niece, the ungrateful family member who hoarded her mysterious wealth and refused to help her own blood. If I said yes, I would be a fool, enabling their greed and allowing them to walk all over me. One evening, staring at another text from Josh, "Hey, just checking in on that loan idea. Jess found a photographer she loves, but we have to book him ASAP." Something inside me snapped. The anxiety and sadness curdled into a cold, clear anger. They thought I was a fool. They thought my success was an accident, a lottery win, a gift from a mysterious benefactor. They had no concept of the discipline, the sacrifice, the sheer relentless work it had taken for me to get here. And they certainly had no idea that the skills I used to build my career, research, analysis, and strategic planning, could be used for other things as well. My uncle wanted a business partner. Fine, I would act like one. It was time for me to stop hiding and start investigating. I needed to understand exactly what I was dealing with. Were they just greedy, or was there something more to this sudden, desperate cash grab? The time for hurt feelings was over. It was time for due diligence. My work as a UX designer is all about understanding systems and human behavior. You observe, you research, you identify pain points, and you look for the underlying truth beneath what people say they want. I decided to apply the same methodology to my uncle's so-called real estate empire. My investigation began not with spreadsheets and financial documents, but with a conversation. I invited my mom out for lunch at a quiet cafe, far from the prying eyes and ears of the Willows. "He's driving me crazy, Haley," she confessed before the menus even arrived. "Mark calls me every day, asking if I've spoken to you. He's convinced you're about to write him a check. He's already talking to contractors about the new office. He pitched me an investment, Mom, a terrible one." "I was afraid of that," she sighed, stirring her iced tea. "He's always been like this, all flash, no substance. Do you remember your grandfather's hardware store? After Grandpa passed, Mark was supposed to take it over. He ran it into the ground in 2 years, sold it for parts. He said the market had changed, but the truth is, he just spent all the profits on a new car and a fancy vacation before he'd even paid his suppliers." This was a piece of family lore I'd forgotten. It was a crucial data point. My uncle had a history of financial mismanagement. "What's his business really like now?" I asked. "He talks a big game, but is it real?" My mom pursed her lips. "He has good years and bad years. Lately, I don't know. His wife, Carol, mentioned they had to pull their youngest out of that expensive private school last semester. She said it was because the curriculum wasn't a good fit, but I got the feeling it was about the tuition." Another crack in the facade. This was more than just greed, this was desperation. When I got home, I opened my laptop and began to dig. My first stop was the county's public records database. Real estate transactions are, for the most part, public information. I searched for properties sold by Sterling Realty over the last 2 years. The results were underwhelming. There were sales, yes, but not the torrent of high-value commercial deals he boasted about. Most were modest residential homes, and the volume had dropped significantly in the last 8 months. The massive commercial property he'd bragged about at dinner, I found the record. He hadn't sold it. His agency was the junior partner on the listing. His commission would have been a fraction of what he'd implied. Next, I looked into the business itself. A quick search on the state's business registry showed that Sterling Realty was a sole proprietorship, not the corporation he made it out to be. This meant he was personally liable for all its debts. There were no partners, no board of directors. It was just him. Then I found the first real red flag. I searched the local court dockets online. And there it was, a lawsuit filed 3 months ago against Mark Sterling by a commercial landscaping company for $28,000 in unpaid invoices. There was another, smaller claim from a printing company for marketing materials. He wasn't just slow to pay, he was being sued. The puzzle pieces were starting to click into place. The dropping sales, the child being pulled from private school, the unpaid vendors, the desperation for a short-term investor. My uncle wasn't expanding, he was sinking. His can't-miss plan to open a new office wasn't a growth strategy. It was a Hail Mary pass, an attempt to use my money to project an image of success that might attract new clients and keep his creditors at bay. He hadn't seen my watch and thought, oh, good for Haley. He'd seen it and thought, there's my lifeboat. The most painful part of the investigation was looking into Josh. I felt a pang of guilt, like I was violating his privacy, but I had to know. I found his social media profiles, which were public. They were a curated highlight reel of a life they couldn't afford. There was Jessica, posing with a new designer bag in front of a restaurant where entrees started at $50. There was Josh, clinking champagne glasses on a weekend trip to Napa. And there, posted just last week, was a picture of the deposit check for their Tuscan wedding venue, with a caption, "It's official, making our dreams a reality. Wedding goals Tuscany or bust." Their dream was being funded by debt and delusion, and they were counting on me to be the final withdrawal from a bank account of fantasy. The small loan they needed wasn't for a photographer. It was likely to cover the checks they were already writing. I closed my laptop, the screen reflecting my own grim expression. My anger had cooled, replaced by a cold, hard clarity. This wasn't about family helping family. This was a shakedown, born of desperation and a lifetime of financial irresponsibility. They had built a house of cards on a foundation of ego, and a strong wind was coming. They wanted me to be their firewall, to protect them from the consequences of their own choices. For days, they had made me feel small, guilty, and selfish. But my investigation revealed the truth. I wasn't the selfish one. Selfish was mocking your niece's frugal lifestyle while secretly drowning in debt. Selfish was planning a lavish European wedding you couldn't afford and then demanding a loan from the very person you'd looked down on. They had left me with 2 options, be their victim or be the bad guy. But my research had just shown me a third option. I didn't have to be either. I could be the one who held up a mirror and forced them to see the truth. I wouldn't give them a handout, but I could offer them a way out. A way that involved responsibility, humility, and hard work, all the things they'd spent a lifetime avoiding. My plan began to form. It would not be cruel, but it would be firm. It would not be an attack, but it would be an undeniable act of self-defense. They wanted a business proposition, I would give them one. For the next week, I let their calls go to voicemail and their texts sit unanswered. The silence, I knew, would make them more desperate. It would amplify their anxiety and make them more receptive to whatever I eventually proposed. This wasn't a game, it was strategy. I was no longer the emotionally reactive niece. I was a designer mapping out a user flow, and the desired outcome was a firm, uncrossable boundary. During that week, I wasn't idle. I used my computer job skills to do more than just research. I drafted a clear, concise, and professional-looking document. It had a title page, a table of contents, and several sections complete with bullet points and neatly formatted tables. I spent 2 evenings on it, refining the language, ensuring it was direct but not insulting, helpful but not condescending. I also made a phone call to a man named David Chen. David was a former colleague who had left the tech world to become a certified financial planner. He specialized in helping people with small businesses and personal debt. He was sharp, empathetic, and had the patience of a saint. I explained the general situation without using names. So, they're asset-rich on paper but cash-poor and drowning in debt, and they see you as a quick fix. He summarized perfectly after I finished. Exactly, I said. I'm not giving them cash. It would be like trying to put out a grease fire with water. But I want to offer them a genuine lifeline. I was hoping you might be part of it. I laid out my idea. David was quiet for a moment, then he laughed. That's brilliantly ruthless, Haley, in the kindest way possible. It's a real, tangible solution to their problem, but it forces them to do the one thing they don't want to do, take responsibility. I'm in. Let me know when. Finally, after 9 days of silence, I responded. I sent a group text to Uncle Mark and Josh. Hello both. Apologies for the delay. I have been giving your proposal a great deal of thought and conducting my own due diligence. I am prepared to discuss a potential investment. Can you meet me at my office tomorrow at 4 p.m.? We can use one of the conference rooms. The shift in tone was deliberate. Due diligence, investment, my office. I was moving the meeting from their territory, a stuffy restaurant, to mine, a sleek, modern tech campus. I was changing the power dynamic. Mark replied almost instantly. Of course, Haley. Fantastic news. We will be there. The next day, I booked a glass-walled conference room with a stunning view of the city skyline. I set up the large monitor at the head of the table. When Mark and Josh arrived, they were visibly out of place. Dressed in their ill-fitting, power suits, they looked like relics from another era amidst the minimalist decor and a workforce of people in hoodies and designer sneakers. Wow, Josh said, gawking at the view. This is where you work. Have a seat, I said, gesturing to the chairs. I remained standing at the head of the table. Coffee, water. They both asked for water, and I poured it for them from a frosted glass pitcher. They looked like nervous clients, not domineering relatives. So, Mark began, rubbing his hands together, his voice booming slightly too loud for the room. Ready to talk numbers? I've got the vision, you've got the capital. Together, we'll be unstoppable. I didn't sit down, Instead, I picked up a remote and turned on the large monitor. On the screen, the title page of my document appeared in clean, sans serif font. Proposal for a strategic partnership with Sterling Realty. Mark and Josh leaned forward, their eyes wide. This was more than they expected. This looked official. This looked like real money. As I said, I began, my voice calm and even, I've done some due diligence on your proposal to fund an expansion. I've analyzed your recent sales volume, public records regarding your business assets, and the general market conditions for boutique real estate firms in this area. Mark's smile faltered slightly. This wasn't the back-of-the-napkin family chat he was expecting. My analysis shows that an expansion at this time would be an extremely high-risk venture. I continued, clicking to the next slide, which showed a graph of their declining sales. The business is currently facing significant cash flow challenges. Taking on more debt to fund an expansion would be, in my professional opinion, fiscally irresponsible. The color drained from Mark's face. Josh was staring at the graph, his mouth slightly open. So, I am respectfully declining your investment proposal, I said. I let the words hang in the air for a moment. Mark looked like he'd been slapped. However, I said, clicking to the next slide, I am a member of this family. And I do want to help you build a sustainable, profitable business, so I have a counteroffer. The slide changed. The new title read, The Sterling Realty Revitalization Plan. I am not going to give you cash, I said, looking Mark directly in the eye. Doing so would only delay the inevitable. Instead, I am willing to make a different kind of investment in you and your business. I laid out my counteroffer. It had 3 points, each displayed on the screen in a neat bullet list. First, I will pay in full for 12 months of consulting services with a top-tier small business financial planner. I clicked, and David Chen's professional headshot and impressive bio appeared on screen. His name is David Chen. He will work with you to restructure your debt, optimize your operations, and create a realistic 5-year business plan. His goal will be to get you to profitability and stability. Second, I will pay in full to settle your outstanding legal debts with your vendors. I didn't list the names, but I saw from the flicker in Mark's eyes that he knew exactly which ones I meant. This will clean your slate and allow you to operate without the threat of further legal action. And third, I said, looking at Josh, whose face had gone pale. For you, Josh, your immediate need isn't a business expansion, it's the wedding. A destination wedding is a massive financial undertaking. Therefore, I will give you a gift, not a loan, a gift. It's a check for $5,000. I paused. On the condition that you and Jessica use it to book a beautiful wedding venue here, locally. And you use the money you save by not flying 24 people to Italy to pay off your personal credit card debt and start your marriage on a solid financial footing. I clicked to the final slide. This entire package, the financial planner, the debt settlement, the wedding gift, is my investment. It's an investment in your long-term success, not a short-term bailout. It's the only offer on the table. You can take it or you can leave it. The room was utterly silent. Mark was staring at the screen, his face a storm of conflicting emotions: shock, humiliation, anger, and a dawning, horrified understanding. Josh just looked defeated. I had not given them what they wanted, but I had offered them exactly what they needed. I had called their bluff, not with anger or accusations, but with a meticulously researched, professionally presented plan that left them with no room to argue. The choice was theirs. The silence in the conference room stretched for what felt like an eternity. It was a heavy, suffocating silence, filled with the unspoken words of pride, shame, and fury. Josh stared at his hands, unable to meet my eyes. Uncle Mark's face had cycled through a spectrum of colors, finally settling on a blotchy, angry red. His folksy, salesman charm had evaporated, leaving behind something raw and ugly. "You spied on me," he finally hissed, his voice low and venomous. "You went behind my back and dug up dirt on my business, on my family." "I did what any prudent investor would do," I replied calmly, my hands steady. "You asked me to be your business partner. I took that request seriously. This is what due diligence looks like." "This isn't business, this is family," he roared, slamming his hand on the polished table. The sound echoed in the glass room. "You think you can just waltz in here with your slideshow and your fancy consultant and tell me how to run my life? I've been selling real estate since you were in diapers." And in that time, I said my vow. Ice dropping but losing none of its firmness, you've run up debts you can't pay and made promises to your son you can't keep. The way you've been running your life is about to run you into the ground. I'm offering you a ladder. It's up to you whether you want to climb it or keep digging the hole you're in. He sputtered, speechless for a moment. He looked at Josh as if for support, but Josh was a statue of misery, his gaze fixed on the table. "And you," Mark snarled, turning his attention to his son. "Are you going to let her dictate your wedding, tell you that your dream is wrong? Jessica will never agree to this." This was the moment of truth for Josh. He could side with his father's blustering pride or face the cold, hard reality I had laid out. Slowly, Josh lifted his head. His eyes were red-rimmed. "Dad," he said, his voice barely a whisper, "she's right." Mark looked as if Josh had physically struck him. "What?" "She's right," Josh repeated, a little stronger this time. He finally looked at me, and for the first time I didn't see an entitled cousin. I saw a young man buckling under the weight of expectations he could never meet. "We can't afford Tuscany. We can't even afford the caterer we booked. I've been moving money from one credit card to another for months. Jessica, she doesn't know how bad it is. I was hoping the loan from Haley would cover it until I closed a big sale, but there are no big sales." The confession hung in the air, a devastating admission of failure. Mark sank back in his chair, all the fight gone out of him, replaced by a look of utter defeat. He looked old. "My offer stands," I said gently, breaking the silence. "All of it. The financial planner for the business, the settlement of your debts, and the wedding gift for you, Josh, under the conditions I stated. I'll have the paperwork for the consultant and the debt settlement sent to you. You just have to sign. The check for you, Josh, is in this envelope." I slid a simple white envelope across the table. It stopped just in front of him. Mark stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "I don't need your charity," he spat, his pride making a last, desperate stand. "I built my business from nothing, and I don't need my niece, with her mysterious tech money and her smug attitude, telling me I'm a failure." He turned and stormed out of the conference room without another word, not even looking back at his son. Josh didn't move. He just sat there, watching the door swing shut behind his father. He looked at the envelope on the table, then up at me. His expression was a miserable cocktail of gratitude and shame. "He won't sign," Josh said quietly. "His pride won't let him." "That's his choice," I said. "But the offer for you is separate. It's your choice. You're 30 years old, Josh. You can keep living under the shadow of his expectations and his debt, or you can start building your own life. A real one." He reached out a trembling hand and took the envelope. He didn't open it. He just held it, staring at it as if it were some strange, alien artifact. "Thank you, Haley," he whispered, finally meeting my eyes. I'm sorry for how we treated you. We were idiots." "Yes, you were," I said, not unkindly. "But you don't have to be anymore." I left him there, sitting alone in the big, glass room with the city lights beginning to twinkle behind him. The confrontation was over. I hadn't yelled, I hadn't shamed them with insults. I had simply given them the one gift they never wanted, the truth. It was a bitter pill, and I knew my uncle would likely never swallow it. But for Josh, I saw a flicker of hope. A chance for him to break the cycle. Walking out of my office building and into the cool evening air, I felt a profound sense of release. The anger was gone. The hurt was gone. In its place was a quiet, solid calm. I hadn't just drawn a boundary, I had reinforced it with steel. I had taken back control of the narrative, not by revealing the price of my watch, but by demonstrating the true value of my character. My real wealth wasn't the number in my bank account. It was the clarity and strength to do the right thing, even when it was the hardest thing. The aftermath was not a sudden explosion, but a series of quiet, seismic shifts. The family landscape, which had seemed so fixed and unchangeable for my entire life, began to crack and reform along new fault lines. Uncle Mark, as Josh predicted, never signed the papers. He chose his pride over a lifeline. He didn't call me, but I heard the updates through my mother, who heard them from my distraught Aunt Carol. Mark had tried to secure a high-interest loan from a predatory lender, but was denied. The landscaping company's lawsuit moved forward, and a lien was placed on their house. He retreated into a fortress of bitter silence, telling anyone who would listen that his own niece had tried to destroy his business out of spite. Some relatives, the E's who valued drama over truth, believed him. I was now the cold, calculating villain of the family story, and for the first time in my life, I was okay with that. Their opinion was a currency I was no longer willing to accept. The biggest surprise was Josh. About a week after our meeting, he called me. "Jessica and I broke up," he said, his voice heavy but clear. "I told her everything. The debt, the lies, all of it. I told her we couldn't have the Tuscan wedding. I showed her your offer, the check for a local wedding. She called me a failure, said she wasn't going to marry into this." He paused. "She gave me back the ring." "I'm so sorry, Josh," I said, and I meant it. "Don't be," he said, and there was a new strength in his voice. "You didn't break us up, Haley. The truth did. Our entire relationship was built on a fantasy, on my dad's fantasy. It was never going to last." He told me he had used my $5,000 gift not for a wedding, but to hire a debt consolidation lawyer. He had quit his father's failing business and taken a salaried job as an entry-level sales associate for a large, stable home building company. It was a step down in title and prestige, but a massive step up in reality. He was living in a small, rented apartment, a shoebox, as his father would have called it. "It's funny," he said, with a dry chuckle. "For the first time in my life, I can actually pay my rent without panicking. It feels good." We started talking more after that. Not every day, but once a week or so. We were like two strangers getting to know each other for the first time, unburdened by the roles we'd been forced to play our whole lives. We were no longer the success and the failure. We were just Haley and Josh. My relationship with my mother deepened, too. She had watched the entire saga unfold with a quiet terror, but when the dust settled, she saw the strength in what I had done. "I was always so afraid of your uncle's temper," she told me over coffee one afternoon. "I spent my whole life just trying to keep the peace. But you didn't. You stood up to him, not with anger, but with facts. You showed him the respect of treating him like a businessman, and he couldn't handle it. I'm so proud of you, Haley." Coming from my gentle, peacekeeping mother, it meant more than any stock bonus or luxury watch. Life settled into a new, better normal. The family gatherings were smaller now and quieter. Mark and his side of the family no longer attended. The toxic cloud of comparison and judgment was gone. What was left was something smaller, but more authentic. One Saturday, about 6 months after the disastrous dinner party, I was at home, enjoying the quiet hum of my apartment. My Patek Philippe was on my dresser, where it usually sat. I rarely wore it now. It had served its purpose. It was no longer armor, it was just a beautiful object, a souvenir from a battle I had won. My phone buzzed. It was a photo from Josh. It showed him standing with a young woman, both of them beaming, holding up a key. In the background was a small, charming, and distinctly modest house. The text below it read, "We did it. It's not a mansion, but it's ours, and we can actually afford it. Wanted you to be the first to know." I smiled, a real genuine smile. I typed back, "It's perfect, Josh. Congratulations." I looked around my own apartment. It was still the same 700 square feet. It was still, by my uncle's standards, a cramped apartment. But it was my home. It was the headquarters from which I had quietly, diligently built a life of my own design. It was the place where I had learned that true wealth isn't about what you can show off, but about what you don't have to prove. The silence was no longer just a possession, it was a victory. And it had never sounded sweeter.